Captain Midnight.
Okay, so I have something deeply shameful to admit to you. All those crappy movie and TV tie-in games that came out in the 90s and 2000s that were completely cynical cash grabs designed to get unsuspecting gamers to buy yet another lazy beat-em-up just because they recognize the name? Yeah, I was the one buying those. It didn't matter if it was Chronicles of Narnia, The Sopranos, or Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. You push that tie-in out, I'd probably buy it. And yeah, a lot of them were bad, but there were some hidden gems in there as well. Basically, the reason I kept falling for this as a kid is that I love the idea of playing as some of my favorite heroes and getting to experience their world in an interactive way. Superheroes especially are perfect for gaming. Their varied superpowers and unlimited amounts of villains to fight fit really well within the formulas of AAA gaming, and some have already had really good games based on them. So I have to ask, why has the Marvel Cinematic Universe, one of the biggest and most popular brands in the history of entertainment, almost completely given up on gaming?
Watch me cut my web, Goblin!
Watch yourself fall, Silk Slinger!
Gotta stop the bombs in time!
If I don't get you web...
Now I know what you may be saying, who cares? Movie tie-in games suck anyway, and most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, you'd be right. And the MCU has dipped their toes into console gaming in the past, to very mediocre results. So why does this matter at all? Well, to answer that we need to ask ourselves, why do most movie tie-in games suck? Do they get terrible development teams to make them who are setting out to make a bad game? Of course not. The reason that most of them are so terrible comes down to one simple issue: time. When a video game has to come out at the same time as the big blockbuster it's based on, corners are just going to be cut. It's kind of inevitable. And development cycles for creating the game that would normally be 3 or even 4 years long are turned into a year and a half. So what we get as a result is, well, this. And that's where the MCU comes in, because they have one feature that all these other franchises kind of lack. They're not time sensitive. Unlike the Charlie's Angels game, which needs to come out right when the movie hits theaters to be relevant, it's a pretty safe bet that people will still be interested in the world of the MCU 4 or even 5 years down the line. And that's why I think there's a lot of untapped potential for the MCU in gaming, because it wouldn't need to hit a strict deadline. This is the reason why the Arkham games or Shadow of Mordor turned out so well. They had time to really perfect those games and make them rise above mediocrity. The Thor video game? Well, they didn't think they had that luxury. They were just trying to slap something playable into the box in time to hit that sweet, sweet release date. And that's really frustrating, because we know superheroes and video games go together well, and games like the new PS4 Spider-Man look really promising. So why can't the MCU also get in on that action? Imagine a massive open-world Iron Man game or a highly polished XCOM-style tactics game starring the Avengers. Why not an Overwatch-esque Guardians of the Galaxy shooter or a Doctor Strange RPG? There's almost no end to what game developers could do with these characters, especially with the massive canvas of the MCU to paint on. And that's another big element. The past MCU games didn't have time to get polished, but they were also lacking in another area: imagination. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing inherently bad about linear third-person shooters or beat-em-ups. There's some great games that do both of those things. But in terms of making a video game around a superhero, I really do think this is the laziest thing you can do with these characters. One of the most beloved superhero games ever is Spider-Man 2 for a reason. After years of solid, but not all that exciting Spider-Man games, they finally decided to take a big risk and do something different with the character. And it was so great that even the new Spider-Man PS4 game is working from that open world framework. It made a big bold choice, and that's something that most movie-based games just aren't willing to do. Boring concepts, like the one found in this game, create boring games, made by people who aren't passionate about what they're creating. But it doesn't have to be this way. There's been less and less tie-in games on consoles these last few years for a reason. They just don't turn a profit anymore, especially as the cost of making AAA games rises. So the answer to this clearly isn't to just pump out a new half-assed game at the release of every Marvel film, but to really take the time to create a great game set in the universe, and then release it whenever it's actually ready.
And that was
This advice seems obvious, but companies have, especially with Marvel properties, ignored it again and again. The last non-LEGO, non-mobile MCU game was Captain America Super Soldier, all the way back in 2011. And yeah, that's more than half a decade ago, and it's exactly what you would imagine it would be. A collection of light platforming, fighting, and quick-time events that scored 5.5s and 6 from critics. It was worse than being memorably awful. It was just the most boring kind of mediocre. There was no passion on display, no love of the character that the player can just feel through the presentation and gameplay like the Arkham games, or even that surprisingly great Wolverine Origins game. And the MCU deserves better than that. The films, well, most of them anyway, are clearly made by people who are engaged and excited by the story they're telling. It only seems right that MCU games should follow suit. It probably doesn't count as an MCU game, but the Telltale Guardians of the Galaxy series is a great example of this, and it could provide a great way forward for MCU branded games. Tie-in games are dying because the very nature of how they're made is flawed. They're mostly cheap games that are churned out for a quick buck. But consumers have caught on. This type of thing may go over well in the App Store, but if we're gonna drop $60 on a new game these days, we expect more than whatever this is. I'm not trying to beat up on these titles to be mean. If you like one of these games, that's great. But I think most people realize that there's so much video game potential in a character like Iron Man that is going untapped in games like this. Superheroes mesh really well with video games. So well that video game companies have created their own and made great games with them. So it just feels right that more characters in the MCU should join Batman and Spider-Man in having truly great games made about them. Hey guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that bell and stuff. But I want to know, what type of game would you like to see from the MCU? I'll be checking out your answers below. Oh, and be sure to check back with me next week because I'll finally be talking about one of the biggest releases of the year, Black Panther.